when I talk about measuring learning impact and performance using ChatGPT, it's very important to mention that my firmly held belief is that ChatGPT is not going to replace expertise. It's not going to take me out of my job. But what it can do, I can use it as a tool to help to augment my expertise as a learning practitioner and help me develop that and give me new ideas and inspiration and areas for me to start exploring that maybe I haven't seen or come across before. So, I will be doing a demonstration of ChatGPT using real learning data from an internal program that I have run. And I've got many data points in that program. And what I'm going to be using ChatGPT to do is to really aggregate and summarize that data down into useful insights that I can use to brief a new cohort who might be coming into the program, or brief the project or program sponsor internally. There are multiple use cases that I will take you through as we start to get into the topic at hand. So what I'm going to ask you to do is please reserve your comments and questions to the end, and we will set aside some time for us to work through those comments and questions. Otherwise, let us get underway. So I'd like to introduce you to someone who you might not know. This is a gentleman by the name of Jack Phillips, and Jack Phillips took the work of Kilpatrick. And Kilpatrick was a gentleman who put together a method for assessing the impact of learning programs way back in the 1950s. But I think the important thing about Jack Phillips and the work that he did was that he started to look at another level of program impact or learning impact inside of organizations. That is the level of looking at what the financial return on investment could be. And Jack Phillips talks about it in this quote in terms of the work that he's been doing. In every aspect of human resources development, the concept of return on investment is being explored, tested, discussed, or debated. On almost every conference agenda, the ROI issue is there. In workshops and general sessions, participants turn out in record numbers to find out how to measure return on investment. And that is at the bulk of the topic that we are going to talk about today. And measuring the return on investment, measuring the impact of our learning programs from a return on investment perspective is actually quite difficult and quite challenging to achieve. So just to help manage the expectation, my goal and objective for this session is to get you to walk away from the session with a little bit more information in terms of how you might go about assessing and reading program impact. Not necessarily ROI from a financial point of view, but ROI potentially from a key performance indicator perspective. How have we managed to shift the dial in terms of the impact of the learning deliveries that we do for our organizations? So why would we even want to measure the impact of learning? There's a few reasons. I've chosen my sort of top 5 reasons why we would want to measure the impact. There are many more reasons why you want to do this, but quite simply for me, it's really to meet a business objective, to understand if our learning contribution helps the business to achieve a business objective or a business goal. Number 2, we definitely want to think about measuring impact of learning to help develop employees and make changes to our learning interventions so that we are developing employees in the most effective ways possible. Number 3 is to understand if behavior is changing. 4, to know if our culture is being transformed in the direction that we might want to transform it. And lastly, and very importantly, and this cannot be understated, is to be able to secure learning and development budget for the next year. We need to be able to demonstrate the impact of our learning in order for the learning and development function, or even the HR function, to prove its business case to the business. We need to be able to show and demonstrate the effectiveness of our human resource development interventions more broadly. So that's the importance of why we would want to measure the impact of our learning interventions on people in the organization and on the business. What might we want to measure? There are many things that we could measure, but I think, again, just in terms of some priority areas for me, we might want to measure how effective our learning interventions are, the degree to which the learning itself was achieved. So the internal goals for that particular learning project. We will want to measure how effectively people absorb the information that was given to them, that was discussed, that was worked through. Number two, we would definitely want to measure what learning or skills gaps still exist and what further training or interventions do we need to do to course correct. Thirdly, we want to understand how engaged our employees are with the learning content. Employee engagement in terms of the work that people do is important, but for the purposes of this presentation, we want to find ways to try and measure and get a sense of how effective the messaging of the learning was, and did people really engage with the content, engage with the facilitator, and start to put some of what they learned into practice in their jobs, in their roles. Lastly, how are our employees now more productive, or maybe even less productive, as a result of the learning interventions? In other words, what was the learning return on investment, right? What was the impact? So I'm sure many of you are fairly familiar with this particular model. It's a really old model. It's one that is almost 70 years old now, and that is Kirkpatrick's 4 levels of evaluation for learning programs. This model was developed by Donald Kirkpatrick, as I mentioned, in the 1950s. It's really one of the most widely used frameworks for evaluating the effectiveness of corporate training programs. There are 4 levels of evaluation that exist in this particular model, and 2 of them are relatively easy to achieve, and another 2 can be quite challenging to actually achieve. So number 1, level 1, reaction. So was the learner satisfied with the training? That's relatively easy to measure. We can just push out an evaluation form and they can give us feedback, whether that is quantitative or qualitative, in terms of how satisfied they are with what they learned. Number 2, or level 2, is learning. So what was the knowledge or skills gained from the training as reported by the participant who attended the training? Again, relatively easy to achieve that, whether that is through an evaluation form, whether that is through coaching or a focus group that is held after the session. Not so difficult to get that data. At level 3, things start to become more challenging and complex. Level 3 is really about behavior. The application of the knowledge and skills in the workplace that led to changed behavior. This can be quite a lot more challenging to actually access this data in ways that are useful to produce results for this particular program. So perhaps we might want to talk to line managers, for example. We might want to survey line managers whose employees went on the training to understand, how, if and when they have witnessed any behavior shifts or behavior training. And number 4, results. This is tough to achieve in terms of measuring what was the concrete result of the training. How might we go about measuring the impact on the organization's performance or their goals as a result of the training? How do we know that this is not up to some other factor that maybe we didn't consider in terms of gauging the business results of the training program. It, improved business performance, organizational performance might be due to some other factor and not our program. And we will spend some time talking about why, or how rather, to start to separate out the potential impact of our program on business outcomes rather than some other factor that might have caused that. Right, so on to Phillips. Jack Phillips created or added an additional level of evaluation to Kirkpatrick's 4 levels, right? He added level 5, and that is the level of return on investment. What is return on investment in learning? It's the comparison of the monetary benefits to the organization versus the costs of actually running or delivering that program in the organization. Very, very important. Not easy to achieve. Doing the actual calculations are easy, but collecting the data can be really quite tricky and quite challenging. So, how do we start measuring return on investment? Number one, we'd need to identify the key performance indicators. So we need to determine which are relevant to the training program. And very, very importantly, which KPIs is the organization trying to measure? So long as there's some good alignment between the key performance indicators in the program and the key performance indicators of the organization, we're going to be a little bit better set up to be able to do slightly more accurate return on investment calculations. Number 2, this is the really tricky one sometimes, to be able to measure the monetary benefits of the training. This is the hard part, quantifying the monetary value of the improvements in key performance indicators as a result of the program. To do this, we might need to convert the improvements into monetary terms. Not always so easy to do. Number 3, we will definitely want to determine the costs of the training program. That's not particularly difficult or challenging to do. So calculate the total costs associated with that training program, including the direct and indirect costs. That's not really all that difficult to achieve. And number 4, to calculate the net benefits. So subtract the total costs of the training program from the monetary benefits. Again, that calculation, not difficult at all to do. It's number 2 here, measuring that monetary benefit to the organization of your particular training program, shifting the dial in terms of those KPIs. That is really where the difficulty and the challenges start to come in. In terms of the actual calculations themselves, you do not need to be a mathematician to do them. So how do we calculate net benefit? So we take the monetary benefits of the program, that is the monetary benefits of improving how people shift the dial on those key performance indicators, and minus that from the total cost of the program. To do return on investment, it's a percentage, right? So we take the net benefits, divide them by the total costs, and times that by 100. The resulting percentage on return on investment indicates ROI for every dollar spent on the training program. So a positive ROI means that the training program has generated a return greater than the costs, whereas a negative ROI indicates that the costs have exceeded the benefits. This is really, really important because we can start to build business cases for continued training, right? If we can demonstrate return on investment, we can start to demonstrate why we need access to more budget, because there's a key business imperative here internally. So if we get this right, we set ourselves up to get further access to budget, further credibility in the organization, and further opportunities for us as learning practitioners to be able to partner with our line clients more effectively and step into their world and their environment and develop programs that really help to shift the dial in their particular environment, that give them a return on the money that we have invested in this. So massive, massive opportunities to really improve how we do our training by measuring it in the most appropriate ways. This is an incredibly important slide, and you will have the slides shared with you. But I asked the question, okay, so, and I posed this to you earlier, how do we know that our training is responsible for a business that's a monetary or a KPI-based improvement? Establishing and we're going to need to put our statistician hats on now, establishing that causal relationship between the training and business outcomes can be challenging because of so many different factors that could potentially influence the results. However, several strategies can help strengthen this case for causality. So there's a few things we can do to start to try and isolate whether our training program was responsible for the enhanced business outcomes, right? I see someone is just unmuted there. Demola, do you mind just popping them on mute? Thank you. Number one, what we can do is establish a clear logical link, right? So we can start to develop a clear understanding of how the training program is designed to impact those specific business outcomes. That speaks to the point that I was discussing around ensuring that the program key performance indicators. So let's say the key performance indicator for this particular business, let me give you a practical example, is to, in this particular division, we would like to increase our year-on-year sales by 10%. We need to make sure that our sales training program has that particular KPI built in. So there's alignment between the KPI of the program and the KPI for the business overall. So in our training program, we want to definitely refer to the fact that what we're trying to do here is to ensure that you, as a salesperson, are going to contribute towards improving the sales figure to 10% from previous years. So we are going to equip you with some skills, frameworks, methodologies to help you to achieve that. Strong alignment, right? That's the one way we can start to understand whether our program had the impact that we believe it did. Number two, we can use control groups, not always possible. So if you can use a control group that did not receive the training and compare the outcomes of that group versus the group that did receive the training, we can start to control for the fact of whether it was our training that had the impact, or at least the biggest impact on the business outcome. Now, three, pre and post assessments. We might want to measure the relevant KPIs or performance metrics before and after the training intervention. That's how we can see whether our training has been effective for the people, and we can start to move towards making a case that because people benefited from the training, the benefit to the business was accrued. So it might not necessarily be that our training program led to the biggest shift, but it is one contributor towards the success was our training. There are two others that I want to mention in terms of isolating whether it was our training that was effective. Number four is controlling for those confounding variables. So acknowledging that there might be other factors that impact on the business outcomes, such as changing market conditions, organizational structure, culture, management practices, etc. So we might want to do something like regression analysis. And don't ask me how to do a regression analysis. I don't know. But that's one thing that we can potentially use. The most important for me is collecting that qualitative data in addition to the quantitative data that we collect to understand program impact. We can use qualitative data that we collect from our participants whether that's on an evaluation form or in a focus group or discussion, to help us to back up the quantitative data that we are finding. And in ChatGPT, shortly, we are going to start working through not quantitative data, but rather some qualitative data to help us support the business case for the impact of our training. So gathering that qualitative data through interviews, focus groups, or surveys can really provide that additional evidence of a potential causal relationship between the training that was delivered and the business outcomes that were found, right? So very important. It's not necessarily just quantitative data that we can use to establish a causal relationship, but that can very much be supported with qualitative data. Okay, so how can we augment learning impact measurement? I think because of some of the difficulties and challenges with regards to measuring return on investment, my suggestion is that we don't necessarily reinvent the wheel. I'm sure organizations represented on this call have got fairly good ways of collecting quantitative data already. I know that many organizations are really quite weak in terms of collecting the qualitative data, right? The conversations that we have about the training, the coaching sessions that we have with participants on the training sessions, the running focus groups to get sort of group views and group consensus on the impact of this training, speaking to line managers and surveying line managers. Those are all really quick wins that we don't do, that we really should start doing. And just that can help us to demonstrate the return on investment of a program. So we don't necessarily have to quantify everything. That's my assertion today. We can take a much broader view of what we can consider to be impact data and use that together to start to build the case for what the business impact of our learning intervention was. So in the last session that we had together, I showed you this particular model, right? This is using design thinking to help us design learning programs. At the ideate, prototype, user test, and refine phases, there are opportunities for us to collect really rich qualitative data from respondents who are on the program, to be able to understand if the program in its current form, if the training in its current form is really working for them, and are they more effective at doing their jobs. Because we run this over multiple iterations, we can start to, over time, collect some really powerful data to help to augment the quantitative data that we might be collecting already in terms of the evaluation forms that we often push out to participants on our training, whether that is internal or external. Talked about focus groups. I think what is really important here is those post-coaching interviews that can really help us to understand how employees are applying what they've learned back in the workplace. Coaching is so important, and it's not necessarily asking that coach to divulge what was discussed in the coaching session, but rather asking questions in a slightly more oblique way in terms of, well, you know, how is this person applying what they've learned? Is there any way that learning and development might be able to support this particular individual or group to be able to better apply what they learned in the organization? So post-coaching interviews can be really, really important, an important means of collecting data. Okay, so we are going to move on to a very short demonstration with regards to ChatGPT-4. So we are going to work with some real data now. And if you were at the last session, we worked on ChatGPT 3.5. now there has been an upgraded deployment of ChatGPT that has been done, and that is called ChatGPT 4. And the user interface of ChatGPT remains the same, but the richness of the outputs is really something that is quite exciting for me. So I'm not going to go through how ChatGPT works. I think if you just review the recording from the last session, I went through that in quite a lot of detail, but I think let us jump into the real world case study of using qualitative data to help us to make key decisions and demonstrate the impact of the particular programs. Okay, are we ready? Let me quickly show you first and foremost the data that we are working on. So, you might be familiar with something like this. So, in terms of the organization that I work at, we collect our participant data using a program called Jotform. Jotform is a free survey tool, really, really easy to use and can be deployed internally in the organization. The great thing about this, if you are using paper-based surveys, you might spend a lot of time manually inputting that data into Excel. Excel is very, very, very much your friend when it comes to working with learning data and working with HR metrics and workforce metrics in general. So I'm sure you would have seen something like this before. You've got the job position or title of the particular respondent who attended the training. They've given a rating for the quality of the content, the quality of the delivery, the quality of the research or the preparation that the facilitator did. And the data that we are going to, there's two pieces of data that we're actually going to work on. Number one is the qualitative data. So any specific recommendations for this particular workshop in the future, maybe what aspects would you like to learn more about at the next opportunity? And we're also going to work with any general comments. This is real data from a program that I ran for a client of ours. It's been anonymized so that we don't give the client away. But this was what we could consider to be a successful program because we helped that client to start to demonstrate the return on investment for that program. They had done a lot of the footwork already in terms of setting up their ROI measures and isolating this particular program out from the other factors which might have led to the success on the particular key performance indicators that that organization was measuring. Right, so fairly sort of generic data. And what we're going to do now is use ChatGPT to start to summarize this data for us in really quite simple and straightforward ways. My provocation for you while we work through this is to ask yourself if your organization is using Net Promoter Score to help establish how effective and impactful programs are. So if you've heard of Net Promoter Score, and if you are using Net Promoter Score, I'd love for us to have a discussion about that because I use Net Promoter Score in my particular learning interventions. And I'll talk about the importance of potentially using NPS to help us gauge whether other people in the organization who have attended this training are going to advocate for this training, that others attend this training inside of the organization. That's the power and importance of the Net Promoter Score. So we're going to calculate Net Promoter for this particular program as well and get an understanding of whether people are prepared to encourage others to attend this particular training internally. Okay, so let me take this, let me close my presentation, and let us open up GPT-4. So, with ChatGPT-4, I can go back to ChatGPT 3.5, but to access GPT-4, you need to have a paid subscription with ChatGPT. That is about $20 a month. And so far, I've found that to be worth every single penny that I've spent on it so far. Right. I'm going to show you something really powerful. So in terms of the data that we collected, the qualitative data, do you have any specific recommendations for this workshop? I'm going to copy paste that data in and ask ChatGPT to give me a summary of what the key recommendations are, aggregated across all of the participants. Let's see what it does. Okay, so let me go and collect the data. And let me prompt ChatGPT. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just make my screen a little bit bigger so that you can see. So I'm going to ask ChatGPT, please summarize the key points of the following program data, and then I'm going to paste it in. So it's really, really long, my prompt, right, in terms of what I'm asking it to do. Let's see what it outputs. There we go. It's summarizing about 250, because there was about 250 participants on this program. It's summarizing 250 lines of data into 5 or 6 key points that I can take to start making changes for this particular program. Really, really a fantastic way of aggregating qualitative data. Quantitative data is really easy to aggregate. We can just do that in Excel with the click of a button using the equals average function in Excel to get that aggregated quantitative data using rating scales, etc. So what does ChatGPT say? It says that participants did find the content informative, the workshops well received. Several participants suggested allocating more time for certain sessions and group discussions to explore the content in more detail. That gives me the indication that I need to dive back into my data and find out which components we need to spend more time on. Number 5, a few participants expressed a desire for more advanced content or more depth in certain topics, while other found the program well pitched and appropriate, right? So those are the particular individuals who I might want to identify for further training and further development. See how this is an incredibly powerful tool to start to aggregate that data. Then I'm going to go through another column. Let's have a look at, okay, so let us find out which aspects would the participants like to find out more about for the next learning opportunity. Let's aggregate that data and see what comes up most frequently in terms of what are the next frontiers and spaces for learning. So in terms of my prompt, let us ask ChatGPT to please summarize the following data into, let's say, 5 points. Control V. There's a whole bunch, there's lines and lines and lines and lines and lines and lines of data here. And this is part of what is incredibly powerful about ChatGPT. It is allowing me, there we go. So very simply, what is the next frontier in terms of what people need to learn? From an aggregated perspective, number 1, enhancing digital platforms and learning analytics. So this was in particular a program for HRBPs that we developed and delivered for clients. So the needs are going to speak to the needs of human resources business partners in this particular organization. So what do they need? They need more training on digital platforms and learning analytics to remain competitive in the market. Number 2, they want more practical examples and case studies of things. Number 3, they want to know how to better adapt to changes in the workspace post-COVID. Number 4, they would like to explore further topics on data analytics, storytelling, HR metrics, and agile business partnering. Number 5, a desire for more training on Power BI, data visualization, and building HR dashboards. It starts to become really quite relevant. This gives us brilliant guidance in terms of what we need to do next, what training we need to do next for this particular audience. Instead of going through the data line by line, we can aggregate this data and start to position this towards this particular audience and see what the uptake is. You see how we can use this to augment what we are already doing with how we collect our quantitative data, triangulated maybe with some business data around KPIs, and then using the qualitative data to back that up. We start to understand more clearly what the impact of our program is. And if we didn't get things right, what changes do we need to make to start to really make the program more impactful, not just from an individual or team learning perspective, but from a business perspective. So understanding learning impact and measuring learning impact is, on the one hand, really quite difficult and challenging to do. But there are some life hacks that we can use to start to better get a sense of that, that impact. So last thing I want to do, there's 2 things I want to talk about. Let's us quickly calculate the Net Promoter Score. This is such a powerful figure. There isn't time for me to go through how Net Promoter Score is calculated. It's quite simple to calculate it. And I don't have time to really take you through very much around what Net Promoter Score could mean, but suffice to say that any score above sort of 50 means that there are more promoters of your program than there are detractors, right? So you've got more chance of people being advocates for your program than you do of people saying that to their colleagues, oh no, you definitely don't want to attend that. I got absolutely nothing. Let's see what output ChatGPT gives us. So I'm going to ask it to please generate a Net Promoter Score using the following data. Let's see what it spits out. Okay, so let's see if it does it or if it tells me what I need to do. Yes, so talking about promoters, passives, detractors, then we'll find the percentage. Okay, so let's see if it does it. Let's give it 1 minute. Otherwise, what we are going to have to do, so just out of interest, ChatGPT is running quite slowly this morning, but out of interest, the Net Promoter Score for this particular program was 70 on the dot. That means that there were far more promoters and people who were neutral about the program than there were detractors. I can take the Net Promoter Score and I can go to the business project owner inside of the organization and say, this is the Net Promoter Score. There seems to be a lot of interest around this program, and there are people who are prepared to advocate for it. I'd love your sign off for us to deliver this program for you again. Yeah, I'm going to ask ChatGPT to stop generating. I've got 1 more slide to share, and then we are going to open it up for Q&A. Let me stop generating there and go back to the presentation. Something that we don't often discuss, and something that we really, really need to start doing, is to figure out where we can have the most impact as HR practitioners. Now, or as learning and development practitioners, in addition. Now, Demola and I are really passionate about steering people away from doing really massive things inside of the organization from a learning perspective without having the capacity and or skills to be able to do this. So what I've done for you is, from my experience, I've put together a chart of what I suggest if we would like to strengthen the learning function. There are things that we can build ourselves in the organization. There are things that we might need to buy or borrow from other organizations. And lastly, there are things that can be either built or bought. So you're going to have access to this slide, and I think it's just a really nice way to cap off the session for us to understand, okay, so as learning practitioners, as HRPPs, as HR practitioners or people practitioners more broadly, where can I have the biggest benefit to the organization in terms of my role? Where can I have the most impact? So very simply to say, in terms of building, internally, we need to build learning journeys. That's my view. We need to build learning personas. And I've taken you through this content in previous sessions. Ourselves, we definitely need to be able to curate content and understand and assess learning needs in a really effective way. And we need to be able to build learner management system and LXP access and integration. In terms of buying, what we need to buy, in my view, is mostly content, right? So we need to own processes, and we need to put our effort towards the learning processes in our organization. But that doesn't necessarily mean we need to own content that gets delivered from a training perspective in our organization. So what content might we need to buy? Very important, L&D consulting and generative AI. I've just showed you how to use some generative AI now. We might want to buy in skills-based assessments. We might want to buy in learning styles assessments. And very importantly, we might want to buy in leadership management and skills-based development programs. We don't necessarily need to develop those ourselves. What can be built or bought? Strategic and operational capacity for learning delivery. So it's all good and fine and well to have a really fantastic, well-articulated learning and development strategy that is linked to the corporate strategy. But if we do not have people in to execute on that strategy, then why are we even undertaking the strategic exercise in the first place? We need to ask ourselves this question. Technical training, we often want to develop internally, because that technical training will be something that is particular and peculiar to our business, our particular industry, or our particular sector, or our particular profession. My suggestion often is that that would need to be built internally. Yes, sometimes using some external service providers to help to augment that. Mentorship and or coaching can be built or bought if your organization does not have a mentorship and or coaching culture. It might be a good idea to buy that in. And in terms of post-intervention assessment tools, again, those can be built or bought. I'm done with my presentation. I hope that the whole thing was not too overwhelming and that you feel a little bit more equipped with some skills that you can use to start to more effectively assess the learning programs or the training programs that you are delivering internally. Thank you very much. I'm done.